Welcome to Omnia Health Insights. Joining us today is Senior Lecturer at University of Birmingham, Aneel Bhangu, to discuss a very interesting study which looks at the importance of urgent changes in global guidelines to stop surgical infection. Thank you so much for joining us, Aneel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
I'm just going to dive into my first question, which is, as healthcare is gravitating towards innovation, tech, and new methods, the study has demonstrated that the rising costs can be burdensome for some regions, especially which lack resources. Can you tell us more about how the genesis of the study and why was it crucial to be carried out, especially for lower income regions?
Thank you. Yes. So the interventions we tested within the study are included in clinical guidelines from the World Health Organization. And when that happens, one is compelled to invest and provide those interventions. So before such technologies and devices and drugs are put into clinical practice, they do need robust testing within a trial. FALCON was done very quickly. It was done over 24 months. And so you get that's considered to be very quick. So very quick evidence toward the benefits and the risks and the cost is important. So for example, in some parts of the world, especially in low and middle income countries, patients often pay for everything that is used. And I think the patient should only be paying if there's proof that it works. If it doesn't work or there's no benefit, then the patient shouldn't be paying.
Looking back towards the innovation part of things, there's a lot of health tech and innovation in that sense that, people look at the next new thing. Sometimes it's often better to go back to the drawing board and look at traditional methods. What is your opinion on that?
I absolutely think we need to be researching and innovating to the future. So COVID has come along and affected everyone. And one of the risks of COVID going forward is that we only provide the basic healthcare and we don't have these layers of innovation and research which we need. For example, keyhole surgery is an innovation that has proven benefits, and I do that type of surgery myself. And unless we continue to innovate, such innovations, such devices, such techniques won't come forward. So actually, I think that doing more research is really important in the post-COVID era. And also during COVID, we saw that the randomized trials done by a group called the Recovery trials out of Oxford, they tested things like the dexamethasone, and you got very quick results from those trials and authoritative results during the pandemic. So actually what we need is more research, but more of higher quality. We need less low quality research. There's probably too much low quality research going on. And that's how we'll improve all our treatments for our patients over the next decade.
And from the study itself, the findings indicated that alcoholic chlorhexidine skin preparation and triclosan-coated sutures are not superior. However, SSI still remains to be a pressing problem. How will the study help future solutions and steer that in the right direction?
So we're already doing our next set of trials on this topic. So the Cheetah trial has already recruited 9,000 out of 12,800 patients. And that will look at changing of instruments and gloves before sort of stitching up the wound at the end to see if the cleanest possible environments will reduce the infection rates. So we are moving on to test more complicated behavioral and team-based approaches. And I think by looking at those slightly more complicated areas, we will be able to prove or disprove benefit.
SSI can also have very deliberating consequences. These go further than physical ailments. They can also carry an economic burden. So can you discuss from the study the findings that we can really deep dive into?
So a wound infection is the most common complication following an operation. And they range from very minor and don't really cause that much trouble to quite major with wound breakdowns and months of work. Now, if this affects what we call the breadwinner, the person who earns most of the money in a household, let's say they have a bad appendicitis, bad wound infection, can't go back to work, then that actually affects more than just the patient because it affects the family around them. The community may have to contribute to their living costs, so it affects the community. And we use a term called catastrophic expenditure. It's when a household has to spend 10 or 20% of their annual income on their healthcare. So wound infections are definitely a source of catastrophic expenditure, because if you suddenly have to be spending half of your annual salary on treating this infection, your family won't have enough food, the rent will become difficult, and your family's plunged into this catastrophic expenditure, which can take years to recover from. Now, so if I circle back to our first question, what you don't want to do is make that catastrophic expenditure worse by making the patient pay for things that don't work. Equally, if there is something that works and gets the patient back to their normal activities faster, I think most people would pay for that. And really what you don't need clever marketing, you need good evidence. And I think that's what we're trying to provide with this series of randomized trials in surgery.
Yeah, absolutely. And the study also touched upon formal health economic analysis in the future paper, which will describe the global costs and potential savings based on FALCON results. Can you elaborate a little bit on this as well?
So the two aspects to that. First is, what is the cost of a wound infection? Because no one really knows. It will differ in different societies, as you might expect, as the costs of living are different. But the very first study that we're going to produce is, what is the cost of a wound infection in these countries? And that's really important, because if we can make the argument that reducing one wound infection will save the hospital $8,000 a year and save the patient $3,000 a year, then it becomes far easier to get policymakers and governments to make positive recommendations. For the specific trial, we will do a health economic analysis, but seeing as the trial didn't show a benefit, that there won't be a cost benefit. But it's still important that we prove that some of these measures are either more expensive or will save money going forward. Because it's great doing the research, but we need to link the research to what we call the policymakers. So the policymakers are either people running the hospitals, the region, or the government. And there's a gap in the moment between the research paper and the policymaker, and we're trying very hard to close that gap. Going forward in COVID, we need to make sure that our systems are strengthened. What we would like to see are, as I've described, good research and good testing of new innovations, but we would like to see operations made smaller and more controllable. So keyhole techniques reduce costs, they get patients home quicker, there are fewer wound infections, fewer hernias. But surgery is best when it's put into a pathway for the patient. What I mean by that, at the moment, it's seen as right at the end of that pathway, as an expensive luxury or as a damage control procedure. What we want to see surgery is shifted right to the start of that pathway. So, for example, if you have a bad appendicitis or cancer that bursts in your tummy, you might see a surgeon then and have a big operation, but it's all too late. What we'd like to see is you come into the hospital a lot sooner from the community, get diagnosed a lot earlier, have a smaller operation. That operation will cost less money and you'll get back to your life a lot sooner. And so that's about considering an operation not as an isolated thing, but seeing it as a part of an integrated pathway that can support whole communities.
Any lasting thoughts you would like to discuss or mention?
No, well, I would like to just again highlight the impact on patients and communities, because surgery is expensive for hospitals, it's expensive for patients around the world. And so I do think having good research to make that surgery as effective as possible and actually as affordable as possible is absolutely important for the future. We cannot, there's some countries around the world, especially in low income settings, where the rates of surgery are extremely low because they can't provide surgery. Actually boosting the amount of surgery is really important because it's how you limit the impact of diseases like cancers. But that needs to be done with both safety and cost in mind, because otherwise the families can live with the consequences of years. And so I hope we see more research like we've done in the FALCON trial, more randomized research, more research that's focused on things that are good for patients.
Definitely.